I think we were far away from the heavy metal thing, because that seems to have a, they're all quite.
Angus Young, the electrifying lead guitarist of AC/DC, has spent nearly 5 decades duck-walking across stages in his trademark schoolboy uniform. To fans, he's the embodiment of raw rock and roll energy, blasting out riffs that have become the soundtrack of rebellion. But behind the iconic image and blistering guitar solos lies a man with sharp opinions and little patience for pretension. Unlike many rock stars who play nice in interviews, Angus has never been afraid to speak his mind. He despises arrogance, he rejects trends, and he has openly mocked musicians he feels stray too far from the essence of rock. To Angus, music is about grit, honesty, and hard work, not image, gimmicks, or inflated egos. Over the years, this uncompromising attitude has led to some legendary rivalries. From fellow guitarists who embraced flash over substance to singers whose behavior clashed with his work ethic, Angus has built a quiet but fierce reputation for calling out the phonies of the music world. And while some of his grudges stayed behind closed doors, enough stories, interviews, and offhand remarks have leaked out to paint a fiery picture. Angus Young has a list of musicians he simply could not stand. Today, we reveal that list, the 6 musicians Angus Young hated the most. And trust us, Number 2 will leave you shocked. When people think of Angus Young, the image is instant and unforgettable. The tiny guitarist in a schoolboy uniform, duck-walking across the stage, shredding his Gibson SG with wild abandon. For decades, Angus has been the heartbeat of AC/DC, not just musically, but visually, a symbol of rock and roll chaos. Yet behind that uniform is a man who takes his craft far more seriously than the theatrics suggest. Born in Glasgow, Scotland, and raised in Sydney, Australia, Angus came from a working-class family. He wasn't interested in fame for fame's sake. He wanted to play music that was raw, powerful, and unpretentious. When AC/DC formed in the early 1970s, Angus and his brother Malcolm set out to strip rock down to its bones. No elaborate concept albums, no political manifestos, no bloated stage shows, just pure pounding rock. It was this no-nonsense philosophy that would become the band's signature and Angus's personal creed. The schoolboy outfit itself began almost as a joke. Angus's sister suggested it as a gimmick to make him stand out on stage, and while it stuck, the energy he poured into that persona was anything but a gimmick. Angus attacked his guitar like a man possessed, his movements manic yet precise. Fans saw the chaos. Fellow musicians saw the discipline behind it. But while Angus embraced the wild man image, off stage, he was surprisingly reserved. He avoided the excesses that swallowed so many rock stars of his era. He wasn't the type to be found passed out in hotel rooms or courting constant controversy. Instead, his fire burned brightest in his playing. That duality, clownish schoolboy on stage, serious craftsman off stage, defined his career. It also defined his taste in other musicians. Angus respected hard workers, those who gave everything to their craft and lived for the music. But he had no time for artists he considered posers or showboats. To him, rock wasn't about elaborate gimmicks or high-minded experimentation. It was about making the audience move, sweat, and feel alive. That philosophy often put him at odds with the prevailing trends in music. In the 1970s, when prog rock bands like Yes and Genesis dominated with complex time signatures and 20-minute songs, Angus rolled his eyes. In the 1980s, when glam metal musicians coated themselves in makeup and teased hair, he dismissed them as circus acts. And when certain punk bands tried to write off classic rock altogether, Angus was quick to remind them that AC/DC was as raw and rebellious as anything on the punk scene. By the time AC/DC reached global superstardom with albums like Highway to Hell and Back in Black, Angus had already cemented himself as a rock purist. Fans adored him, critics respected him, and his peers, at least the ones he admired, saw him as a guitarist of singular power. But for those who crossed his line, whether through arrogance, laziness, or what he saw as betrayal of rock spirit, Angus had no patience. For all the madness he projected on stage, Angus Young lived a surprisingly disciplined life once the amps were switched off. He wasn't a rock star who chased after headlines or indulged in endless scandals. In fact, compared to many of his peers, Angus kept a low profile. He didn't surround himself with entourages or waste energy on Hollywood parties. His real obsession was always the same: the guitar. Off stage, Angus was intensely private, preferring quiet routines to the chaos most people expected from a man dressed in a schoolboy outfit. He was known to spend hours rehearsing riffs, perfecting solos, and locking into the tight rhythmic interplay with his brother Malcolm. That devotion to music defined him as much as his wild stage persona. But along with that discipline came sharp opinions. Angus wasn't one to fake admiration for people he didn't respect. If he thought a musician was lazy, pretentious, or hiding behind image instead of talent, he didn't mince words. Colleagues often described him as blunt, never rude for the sake of it, but brutally honest when he felt someone was tarnishing the spirit of rock. One of Angus's biggest frustrations was what he saw as the growing commercialization of rock. To him, record executives and opportunistic artists often treated music as a product rather than a craft. He despised artists who were more concerned about chart positions than about authenticity. AC/DC themselves rarely chased trends. Even at the height of glam rock or grunge, Angus and his band stuck to their guns, delivering raw riffs and blues-based rock that never strayed far from their roots. This stubborn dedication made Angus respected by fans, but sometimes difficult for other musicians. He wasn't impressed by technical wizardry for its own sake. Guitarists who shredded with lightning speed but lacked soul left him cold. Likewise, singers who wrapped themselves in ego and drama quickly found themselves in his bad books. Angus valued authenticity above all else. If he sensed arrogance or phoniness, it was enough to sour him forever. Despite his bluntness, Angus wasn't cruel. Musicians who earned his respect often found him to be loyal and surprisingly humble. He had a deep admiration for old bluesmen and straightforward rock pioneers like Chuck Berry, who inspired his style. Angus often credited those influences rather than taking sole credit for his sound, showing a humility rare among global rock icons. Still, his honesty meant grudges lingered. Unlike some rock stars who smiled through fake compliments, Angus carried a mental list of musicians he couldn't stand. Sometimes these grudges were based on personal interactions, moments of arrogance, unprofessionalism, or disrespect. Other times it was purely philosophical, artists who, in his view, betrayed the essence of rock and roll. To the public, Angus remained the cheeky schoolboy with a mischievous grin. But behind that grin was a fiercely principled man. A man who, despite living in the wildest corners of rock and roll, always kept his standards high. And those standards meant that certain musicians, no matter how famous, talented, or influential, would always remain on his blacklist. Angus Young has always been blunt about what he loves in music and equally blunt about what he can't stand. Over the years, his sharp tongue and no-nonsense attitude put him at odds with a surprising variety of musicians. Sometimes the feuds were brief, sometimes they simmered for years, but all of them revealed Angus's uncompromising philosophy. Rock and roll must remain raw, honest, and free from pretension. One of his most famous points of friction was with the rise of punk rock in the late 1970s. While punk fans often accused AC/DC of being dinosaur rock, Angus scoffed at the idea that three-chord punk bands were somehow more authentic. In interviews, he dismissed much of the punk scene as sloppy noise, claiming that AC/DC had been delivering real, working-class rock long before punk tried to claim rebellion as its own. Bands like the Sex Pistols may have courted controversy, but Angus saw them as media darlings rather than true musicians. Another rivalry brewed during the glam metal explosion of the 1980s. Angus openly mocked groups like Mötley Crüe and Poison, suggesting that their image mattered more than their music. For him, hairspray, spandex, and over-the-top theatrics were distractions from the essence of rock. "We don't need all that glitter," he once remarked. "Just give me a guitar and an amp." Though some glam musicians idolized AC/DC, Angus returned little respect, viewing them as circus acts playing dress-up. Even in the world of guitar heroes, Angus had strong opinions. He frequently criticized musicians who embraced technical shredding over feel, often throwing shade at players from the virtuoso-heavy 1980s metal scene. While he respected skill, he believed speed without soul was meaningless. "You can play 1,000 notes a minute," Angus once quipped, "but if you've got no groove, you've got nothing." This attitude put him at odds with guitarists who prided themselves on being technicians rather than entertainers. Perhaps one of his more surprising tensions was with alternative rock in the 1990s, when grunge bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam took over the charts. Many thought AC/DC's brand of rock would fade, but Angus doubled down, criticizing bands that seemed ashamed of rock's fun, celebratory side. He accused some alternative acts of being too self-serious, forgetting that rock and roll was meant to make people move and feel alive. Not all of Angus's grudges were stylistic. Some were personal. Within the hard rock community, there were stories of him clashing with fellow musicians who let ego take over. He valued professionalism, showing up on time, respecting the crew, giving your best at every show. Musicians who didn't meet those standards quickly landed on his bad side. Still, Angus was never driven by jealousy. He didn't hate musicians for their success. He hated them for what he saw as betraying the heart of rock. Whether it was punks pretending to be rebels, glam rockers drowning in makeup, or shredders who forgot about rhythm, Angus called them out with the same sharp honesty. And from these rivalries and criticisms emerges a very specific blacklist: 6 musicians who, more than anyone else, came to symbolize everything Angus Young rejected in music. Angus Young rarely wasted time on personal feuds, but when it came to music, he drew hard lines. His disdain was reserved for artists who, in his eyes, betrayed the true spirit of rock and roll. Over the decades, a pattern emerged. Certain names, certain bands, and certain movements that Angus simply couldn't stomach. Here are the 6 musicians who, more than anyone else, earned his scorn. Number 1. Johnny Rotten, Sex Pistols. To Angus, the Sex Pistols represented everything fake about punk. Their manager, Malcolm McLaren, manufactured their image, and their short-lived career was built more on scandal than substance. Angus once dismissed punk bands as pretend rebels, and Johnny Rotten was the poster child. While Rotten bashed old guard rockers like AC/DC, Angus fired back by proving that true rebellion didn't need shock value. It needed riffs. Number 2. Vince Neil, Motley Crue. The glam metal explosion of the 80s was a circus Angus couldn't stand, and Vince Neil embodied it. To Angus, Neil's vocal style lacked grit, and the band's obsession with image overshadowed the music. He believed Crue were more about hairspray and headlines than hard rock. When asked about glam bands, Angus once quipped, "That's not rock and roll, it's dress up." Number 3. Yngwie Malmsteen. While many guitarists admired Yngwie's virtuosity, Angus saw him as the epitome of speed without soul. Malmsteen's neoclassical shredding might have impressed on a technical level, but Angus often stressed that music should groove, not just dazzle. "It's not about how many notes you play," Angus said. "It's about the one note that hits you in the gut." Malmsteen's style never matched that philosophy. Number 4. Axl Rose, Guns N' Roses. Although AC/DC would later work with Axl during a turbulent moment in their career, Angus's relationship with the Guns N' Roses frontman was always strained. Axl's notorious lateness, ego-driven antics, and volatile reputation clashed with Angus's professionalism. While Angus admired Slash's guitar work, he had little patience for singers who thought of themselves as larger than the band. Number 5. Kurt Cobain, Nirvana. The grunge movement never sat well with Angus, and Kurt Cobain symbolized its rejection of classic rock values. While Cobain admired some of AC/DC's work, he also lumped them in with the so-called dinosaur rock acts grunge tried to bury. Angus resented that attitude, arguing that grunge bands stripped rock of its joy and energy. To him, Cobain's self-destructive persona was the opposite of what rock should inspire. Number 6. Gene Simmons, Kiss. Few rockers irked Angus more than Gene Simmons. Kiss may have packed arenas, but Angus saw them as the ultimate example of gimmick-driven rock. Between the makeup, the merchandising, and Simmons's massive ego, AC/DC's guitarist dismissed the band as more business than music. "We don't breathe fire," Angus once joked. "We just play." His jab was as much about philosophy as rivalry. Together, these 6 names paint a clear picture of Angus Young's worldview. He despised gimmicks, arrogance, and empty showmanship. Whether it was Rotten's fake rebellion, Neil's glam glitter, Malmsteen's soulless shredding, Axl's ego, Cobain's anti-rock stance, or Simmons's circus acts, each of them clashed with Angus's vision of what rock was meant to be. In the end, Angus's grudges weren't personal, they were philosophical. He stood for raw, blues-driven rock and roll. If you betrayed that, you earned his contempt. And that honesty is part of why, decades later, Angus Young remains one of the most respected and feared voices in music.